I never could have imagined that my Tuesday night would end with the most notorious crime boss in all of New York lying unconscious across the hood of my old Honda. A model from the year 1998, it was 2:03 in the morning when I first saw him slumped over, motionless, blood seeping from his temple, and the thick, burning scent of whiskey mingling with the cold night air. The man whose name made even the most hardened street thugs whisper had just collapsed in front of the rent-controlled apartment I called home, right in the heart of Brooklyn. Every instinct in me screamed to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen a thing, but I didn't. Upstairs, my daughter Lily, just 8 years old, was sound asleep while I stood frozen on the sidewalk, heart pounding out of rhythm, shoes soaked through from the rain. Eyes locked on a man I had never met but whose name I knew all too well. He was the owner of the restaurant where I worked the late shift. The man whispered to have deep ties to the police and a past no one dared to uncover. Gabe Moretti. The sound of police sirens grew louder, echoing closer with each passing second. I had only moments to decide. Leave him there. Risk being caught up in something I could never untangle. Or drag him into my car. Help him. And pray I wasn't stepping into a storm that would swallow me whole. I chose the latter. In a panic that felt more like instinct than thought, I rolled him over. His expensive coat was soaked through. Streaks of blood smudged across the crisp, snow-white shirt underneath. The stench of liquor on his breath made my head spin. But when I touched his wrist, I felt a steady puss. Somehow, I managed to haul his heavy body into the passenger seat. Rain lashed at my face as I slammed the door shut. Hands trembling as I fumbled the keys into the ignition, I whispered to myself, more a plea than a warning, that he had better not die in my car. Then I hit the gas and pulled away from the curb just seconds before the red and blue lights of a patrol car swept across the corner. My heart pounded like it might shatter as I rifled through his wallet and found a card embossed with an address, a luxury building overlooking Central Park. I had never set foot in that part of the city. Never dreamed I'd one day be delivering New York's kingpin back to his home. But what truly sent a chill down my spine was what happened when I got there. Before I could even open my door, a doorman in a perfectly pressed suit stepped forward, opened the car door with a bow, and said, "We've been expecting you, Miss Sanders." And I knew, without a doubt, I had never told this man my name. That was the first moment I understood things were about to get far more complicated than I was ready for. And that choosing to help a stranger in the rain that night had just changed everything for me and my daughter forever. If your heart is beating just a little faster right now, if this story has left you wondering what happens next, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need a story like this today. Dear Single Mom is a place where real, heartfelt stories are told. Stories that speak to those who've walked through hardship with quiet strength. Stories that remind us we're never as alone as we think we are. Where are you watching this from? Leave a comment and let us know where in the world this little story has reached. We'd love to know how far it's traveled and who it's touched. Now, take a deep breath, because what's coming next might just surprise you even more. I stepped out of the car with my hands soaked through, the cold clinging to my skin like a whispered warning that I had just crossed into a world that did not belong to me. The doorman, dressed in a tailored gray suit, showed no surprise at the sight of a woman arriving with an unconscious man in her car. Instead, he opened the door with practiced ease, casting only the briefest glance at Gabe before turning his eyes toward me, measured and unreadable. "We've been expecting you, Miss Sanders," he said, his voice even and light, as if this were simply part of his nightly routine. I froze. How did he know my name? I had never been here before. Had no ties to anyone who moved in circles like this, but there was no time to ask. The rain was still pouring down, and Gabe, though still unconscious, looked as if he might wake at any moment. The doorman reached in and lifted him with surprising strength for someone so lean, then gestured for me to follow him into the lobby. The building was magnificent. All marble walls and warm yellow light reflected across floors polished to a mirror shine. I felt like I had stepped onto the set of a film that was never meant for someone like me. A private elevator was already waiting. 35th floor. The penthouse, the doorman said as he pressed the button, then quietly stepped back, his eyes offering a silent message that what had happened tonight was not to be spoken of again. I stood in the elevator, my heart hammering, watching the numbers rise as Gabe leaned against my shoulder. His body heavy and cold, the apartment emerged when the doors opened directly into a vast and almost lifeless space. The recessed lights reflected off walls made entirely of glass that looked out over Central Park. A view so breathtaking it felt unreal. And yet the space itself was untouched by human presence. No family photographs. No books. No clutter. Not even a sign that anyone actually lived there. Just a kind of curated perfection, so precise it felt sterile. I guided him to a black leather sofa that probably cost more than 6 months' worth of my rent. The air still carried the sharp mix of blood and liquor. I searched through the kitchen, which was spotless to the point of being cold, and found a first aid kit in a drawer beside the sink. As I knelt to clean the wound at his temple, me fingers trembled, unsure if it was from the chill or from fear. Suddenly, his eyes snapped open, ice blue and sharp as a blade. His hand clamped around my wrist. "Who sent you?" His voice had none of the drunken slur from before, only a cold, razor-sharp clarity that chilled me to the bone. I don't know why I didn't pull away. "No one," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I'm Emily Sanders. I work at your restaurant. I found you unconscious on my car, and I don't think either of us wants to explain any of this to the police tonight." His eyes didn't leave mine, scanning for lies in every word. I could hardly breathe under the weight of that gaze. Then, as if something clicked in his memory, his expression softened just slightly. "You're the hostess, the one with the kid who draws on napkins." My spine went rigid. How could he possibly know that? I pulled my hand away and stood, clutching the bloodied cotton pad. "I did the right thing at the wrong time," I said quietly. I'm not sure if I was speaking to him or to myself. "If you're all right now, I need to get back to my daughter." He was silent for a long moment, then turned to the window, where the pale light of dawn was just beginning to break through the silhouettes of the city skyline. "You shouldn't drive when you're this tired," he said, without looking at me. "Take the guest room. Get some sleep before you go." Before I could argue, he stood, without the slightest trace of a stumble or weakness, and disappeared down a long hallway, leaving me alone in that elegant, sterile apartment with a kind of quiet overwhelm I couldn't quite name. And I had no way of knowing that tonight was only the beginning. I don't remember when I drifted off. The guest room was so still, so quiet. It made me forget where I was. When I woke, morning light was seeping through the curtains, casting a pale glow across the crisp white blanket. Everything in the room was clean, precise, and far too unfamiliar. It took me a few moments to piece together what had happened. The rain, Gabe, blood, the police, this apartment, and then I heard a sound outside the door. A flicker of caution jolted me upright. My heart pounded as I stepped into the hallway, its polished wood gleaming under the soft light. There were no voices, just a heavy quiet, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Waiting, I crept into the living room. Gabe was standing by the window, his back to me. The suit from the night before was gone, replaced by a white shirt and dark slacks. Not a wrinkle in sight. He turned when I entered, and those same icy blue eyes met mine. Clearer now, sharper. The blood was gone from his face, replaced by a clean, narrow line above his temple, neatly bandaged. "Did you sleep well, Miss Sanders?" His voice carried no warmth. I nodded, keeping a few cautious steps between us. "Thank you for letting me stay." He gave a slight nod, then stepped toward me without warning. "Now tell me, who sent you?" The question landed like a blow. His tone wasn't loud, but it was laced with a quiet threat. His entire body was wound tight, like a wire ready to snap. "I told you already," I said, trying to steady my voice, though my hands were cold. "No one sent me. I found you unconscious on my car. I thought you were in danger." His eyes never left mine, searching, dissecting every word I spoke. I kept going. "I didn't even know who you were until I found your wallet. Gabe Moretti. I'd heard the name. Sure, but I honestly just thought if the police saw you like that, neither of us would come out of it clean." A few long seconds passed in silence. I didn't dare move. Then Gabe slowly stepped back, his shoulders loosening slightly. Not many people would take a man like me home in the middle of the night. His voice was lower now. Calmer. But I still couldn't read him. I wasn't brave. I said, my lips dry. I'm just a single mother who didn't want to get mixed up with blood or cops. I just wanted to go home to my daughter. He tilted his head. Lily. I stared at him. Stunned. Your daughter's name is Lily. She's 8. Draws pictures on napkins while she waits for her mom to finish her shift. I remember. I was speechless. He didn't just know my name. He remembered my child. That wasn't an accident. Why do you know so much about me? My voice wavered despite me trying to hold it steady. Gabe moved toward the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and handed it to me. I'm not following you. If that's what you're thinking. I run my business tightly. I notice the people who work for me. You're one of the few who's never late. Never complains. Always smiles at the customers even when your eyes are carrying the weight of the day. I took the water, doing my best to hide the shaking in my hand. I don't know what to say. He shook his head. You don't have to say anything. But I need you to understand something. You showing up last night, at that exact moment, as the exact person, that wasn't random. I don't believe in random. I looked him in the eye. I'm not part of anybody's plan. I'm just Emily Sanders. 3rd floor. Old building in Brooklyn. Working 2 jobs to raise a kid and never once imagining I'd cross paths with you. Especially not like that. A long pause followed. Then Gabe nodded. This time, a real nod. Without the edge. Then maybe I owe you a thank you. I didn't know what to say to that. Instead, I glanced at the wall clock. I really need to get home. Lily will wake up soon and wonder where I am. Gabe looked out the window. My car will take you. It's not safe for you to go alone. Before I could refuse. He was already placing a call. His voice firm and short. The kind of voice that no one argued with. I looked at him one last time before leaving the apartment. Not knowing whether this strange night was finally over, or just the start of something far more complicated. But I knew one thing. The way he looked at me, the way that gaze settled on me like it saw something I wasn't even sure of myself. It stirred something inside me, something I hadn't yet found a name for. The black SUV pulled up quietly along the curb in front of the old apartment building where Lily and I lived, its polished surface catching the first light of day and glinting like it had no business, belonging on this street of peeling walls and rusted stair rails. I stepped out, trying to keep my expression calm even though my mind was still spinning from everything that had happened. The driver, dressed in a dark suit, said nothing beyond a polite good morning. I nodded, then hurried inside the building, feeling as though I had just slipped back into a different life after waking from a strange, unsettling dream. Mrs. Jenkins, my elderly neighbor who watched Lily whenever I had a late shift, opened the door when I knocked. She gave me a once-over, her eyes pausing briefly on the clean, unfamiliar clothes I wore. Clearly not mine. But she didn't ask. Lily ran to me, arms flung wide. Her face lit up with a smile. She didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Just happy her mother was home. I held her tight, trying to mask the fatigue and confusion behind my eyes. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I showered, changed clothes, straightened up the apartment a little, then began getting ready for work like I did every other day. My hands trembled slightly as I slipped into the familiar black uniform. When I arrived at the restaurant that afternoon, everything looked the same. Guests sat scattered around the dining room. Servers moved briskly between tables. But something in the air had shifted. It was taut, heavier somehow, and I could feel eyes on me more than usual. As I stepped into the staff room, I was stopped by Mr. Martinez, the manager in his early 50s who rarely spoke to me beyond pleasantries. He handed me a new uniform, still in its plastic garment bag. It wasn't the standard black dress. It was a light gray women's suit, neatly tailored, along with a folded piece of paper outlining a new work schedule. You're not on floor service anymore, he said, avoiding eye contact. Starting today, you'll handle VIP reception and assist with special events. Your hours will be more consistent. The pay's been adjusted. I stood frozen. Why? I asked softly. my fingers gripping the fabric. I didn't ask for a new position. I'm not qualified for this. He shrugged. It came from above, specifically from Mr. Moretti. It felt like someone had poured a bucket of ice water over me. I walked out of the room in a daze. The curious stares from coworkers followed me like a tide. Some avoided my gaze entirely. Others watched me with a mix of suspicion and envy. I slipped into the restroom, leaned back against the door, and tried to breathe. I had helped him because it felt like the right thing to do. I hadn't asked for anything in return. I didn't want to be mistaken for someone trying to cash in on a connection I never asked to make. When I entered the new area I'd been assigned to, the atmosphere was entirely different. The space was quieter, wrapped in dark wood panels and warm golden lighting. The tables were draped in pristine white linen, the chairs upholstered in real leather. I stood still, feeling completely out of place in a world that wasn't mine. And then he appeared, Gabe Moretti. He moved through the restaurant with a calm so commanding it seemed to still the room. Staff straightened instinctively. Conversations hushed. He wore a navy shirt, sleeves rolled back just enough, hands in his pockets. That signature blend of cool detachment and quiet authority. When he reached me, he didn't bother with greetings or formalities. The first thing he asked was, "How's Lily?" I froze. The question wasn't sharp or invasive. It was startlingly genuine. I answered softly that she was fine, just a little confused about why I wasn't home that morning. He nodded, his expression as unreadable as ever. "I don't do things I don't mean to do," he said, as if answering a question I hadn't had the nerve to ask. "This new role suits your abilities better than carrying trays, and it's safer." Before I could respond, he turned and walked away. But I understood. His message wasn't just about the job. I was being drawn into something I hadn't chosen, and the most frightening part of it all was that some part of me wasn't sure I wanted to walk away. I began the new job the following afternoon, dressed in a tailored suit that fit with the precision of a whisper, each seam and stitch worlds away from the worn black dress I had worn night after night in the front of house. As I stepped down the corridor leading to the VIP section, it felt like stepping onto a stage where every movement was under a spotlight, every eye turned toward me, but not with welcome. There was doubt in those stares, judgment, a coldness that clung to me like a thin veil of smoke. I couldn't shake off. People who used to chat with me during lunch breaks now avoided my gaze. Conversations halted the moment I entered the staff room. At the bar, I caught Maria whispering something to a colleague, glancing at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I knew what they were thinking. They were trying to figure out what I had done to be promoted overnight. Some probably thought I had slept with the boss. Others believed I was hiding something big enough to make Gabe Moretti himself pull strings. I couldn't blame them. In a world where everyone had to fight twice as hard just to earn a compliment, my sudden elevation was a thorn that didn't sit right. But the truth was stranger than their whispers. And I couldn't tell anyone about that night in the rain, about the blood smeared on the hood of my old car, or about the penthouse with its cold windows and the man whose name no one dared speak above a murmur. So I focused on the work. I memorized every name, every face, every preference, who liked their wine chilled just slightly less than standard, who hated cilantro, who only ever sat at the window table. I learned quickly, did more than was asked, and kept my smile steady measured. Never too familiar, never too distant, but the stares never faded. One day, while adjusting the settings on a banquet table before guests arrived, I heard the soft click of the door and the unmistakable rhythm of footsteps behind me. Gabe entered the room without a bodyguard. Without announcement, the space fell instantly quiet. Staff looked up and then quickly away, as if his presence thickened the air around them. He walked directly to me. "You're doing well," he said, voice low but clear. "I don't want your gratitude. I just want you to keep going." I nodded, silent. As he left, I felt the weight of every stare behind me like a chill against the back of my neck. His presence hadn't eased anything for me. If anything, it had only widened the distance. I was no longer just the woman working hard to make ends meet. I was someone holding something they couldn't name and couldn't reach. That night, as I left through the back exit after my shift, I found Lucas, one of the line cooks, leaning against the wall, Smoking. He glanced at me, then spoke with a tone that balanced somewhere between a joke and a warning. Careful, Emily. When he takes an interest in someone around here, it's rarely for simple reasons. I stood there for a beat, then answered quietly. I'm not looking for anything. Just doing my job. He shrugged, stubbed out his cigarette in the metal bin, and walked off without another word. I watched him go, feeling the invisible line between me and the rest of them solidify into something more like a wall. And I didn't know if I could climb over it or if I'd be swallowed by the stairs meant for those who don't belong. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back. Not after all that had happened. Not after stepping one foot into Gabe Moretti's world. And something deep inside told me that world had only just begun to open its first door. I received the call on a Friday afternoon. Just after my shift ended. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the other end, male. Deep. Direct. Offering no introduction. He said simply that Gabe wanted to invite me and Lily to dinner at the penthouse. It wasn't framed as a social gathering. It felt more like an instruction wrapped in politeness. He hesitated. Briefly. But then said yes. Unsure why. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the part of me that wanted to finally put a name to whatever this was that had begun to unfold around us. When I picked Lily up from school, she was chattering away about a math quiz and the new cat she'd drawn, completely unaware that her mother was trying to find a way to explain that tonight they'd be having dinner in the home of a man whose name had been linked to headlines with words no child should ever hear. During the ride, in the now familiar black car driven by the same quiet chauffeur, Lily sat pressed against my side, clutching her tin of colored pencils the way some children hold stuffed animals. It was her shield. I wore a simple beige dress. She wore a blue one with tiny flowers. Her hair neatly braided on both sides. When we stepped into the lobby of the building, the doorman greeted us with a nod. Not the slightest bit surprised. I had grown used to the way they carried themselves. As if everything had already been arranged in advance, Gabe met us at the door. He wasn't in one of his tailored suits this time. Just a white shirt and gray jeans. He looked more ordinary, more human, but his eyes were still the same deep, unreadable, and full of something I couldn't name. "Good evening," he said, then knelt to Lily's height. "And hello to you. You must be Lily." Lily tilted her head, eyes wide, studying him like a painting she hadn't decided how to feel about. "Yes. Who are you? Mommy said you're the one who gave her the fancy clothes. Was that really you?" I froze, but Gabe chuckled. Not mocking, just quiet and brief. "That was me. But I didn't just give your mom nice clothes. I invited both of you here tonight because I owe her a thank you." Lily frowned in thought. "Because Mommy saved you from the police." I opened my mouth, a dozen warnings scrambling to get out. But Gabe raised a hand gently. "That's right. And I wanted to thank you, too, for letting your mom lend me a bit of her time that night." Lily considered this seriously, then stepped closer without warning and said, "You're really tall, but your eyes are sad, just like Mommy's used to be. Are you lonely too?" The air left my lungs. Gabe paused, just for a beat. Then something softened behind his gaze. He sat down on the polished wooden floor until he was eye level with her. "Maybe I am. But tonight, with both of you here, I don't feel quite as alone." Lily beamed. "I'll draw you a picture." Gabe nodded, and I saw his shoulders ease just slightly, as if for the first time since I'd met him. He had lowered his guard, not for me, but for her. Dinner was served by a housekeeper dressed immaculately, but there was nothing cold about the way the meal unfolded. The food was simple: creamy butternut squash soup, grilled salmon, and macaroni and cheese, Lily's favorite. Through it all, Gabe didn't ask me a single question about work. He didn't mention the restaurant. Instead, he listened as Lily talked about her art teacher, about Emma who always stole the pink pencil, and about how she wanted a puppy that could dance. When she finished, and was given permission to draw quietly at a table by the window, I turned to Gabe, unable to keep the question to myself. "Why did you invite us here? Tonight doesn't feel like a simple thank you." He looked at me for a long moment, then spoke slowly. "I wanted to meet your daughter. Because you're the first person in a very long time who's looked at me and seen something other than a name or a reputation. You saw me. And Lily reminds me of my sister. The way she looks at the world, the way she speaks. She brought back something I forgot I ever had. I didn't know what to say to that. I only knew something inside me went still. The caution I always carried in his presence stepped back for a moment. Not gone, but softened. And I realized then that my daughter had opened a door in Gabe Moretti that I wasn't sure anyone else had ever touched. Not with power, not with fear, but with the fearless innocence of a child who hadn't learned yet to be afraid of the dark. And that, more than anything, might be the most dangerous thing I'd ever seen. Lily had fallen asleep on the velvet chair by the window, one hand still loosely clutching her colored pencil. The unfinished drawing in front of her showing a little dog in a dress standing in the middle of a flower garden. I lifted her gently, feeling her soft, even breaths against my shoulder, the faint scent of children's shampoo rising from her hair. Gabe led me down a long hallway and opened the door to a small, prepared room, a single bed, a light comforter, stuffed animals neatly arranged on a shelf. I didn't ask how he knew what Lily liked. I just laid her down, pulled the blanket to her chest, and kissed her forehead. When I stepped back into the hallway, Gabe was waiting, hands in his pockets, his face calm and shadowed beneath the soft hallway light. Neither of us spoke at first. Then he turned and walked ahead, and I followed. The kitchen lights were off, leaving only the living room bathed in a warm, gentle glow. Gabe poured 2 glasses of wine, handed me one, and sat on the sofa. His gaze turned to the city outside, where Manhattan was slowly sinking into night. Lily reminds me of Anna, he said, his voice rough, as if pulling up a memory long buried. I sat across from him, wine glass in hand but untouched. Anna was my sister, he continued, not looking at me. She was 6 years younger. When we were kids, she used to follow me everywhere, sneak food into my bag when I had to go out with our father. She once drew me as a superhero, a 13-year-old boy in a bright red suit with a cape flying behind him. I let out a quiet laugh but didn't interrupt. Gabe took a sip of his wine, then placed the glass on the table. The last time I saw her was on a winter afternoon. I remember because the snow was thick, and she insisted on going outside even though our mother said no. I promised I'd take her to the park the next day, but the next day never came. He paused, his hand tightened on his knee, as if bracing himself against the weight of what he was about to say. We were attacked. A rival group ambushed my father's car. Anna wasn't supposed to be there. She should have stayed home, but our father brought her along, thinking she'd be safer in a car with bodyguards. They aimed for him, but they hit her. He sat still, unsure what to say, because there was nothing that could soften the shape of that kind of memory. Gabe turned his head then, his eyes suddenly locking onto mine. I didn't cry. Not then. Not after. I just remember standing there, frozen, staring at her body in the hospital, her coat soaked with blood, her pink canvas shoes still crusted with snow. My father was on the phone, telling me not to talk to the police. He only cared about the financial losses, the power shift. He didn't say a word about Anna. His voice dropped low. I swore I'd never become him. But from that day on, I learned to close off, not to love too much, not to let anyone get close enough to hurt. My chest felt heavy. Maybe I understood just a sliver what it meant to survive in a world built on power and silence, yet still carry a grief as raw as the day it began. Lily makes you remember, I said quietly, but that's not a bad thing. He nodded faintly, his eyes still fixed on the sky beyond the glass. No, not bad. Just frightening. She's not afraid of me, and that makes me feel like I'm someone Anna might have been proud of. I didn't respond. I just set my wine down gently and leaned back in the chair. In that still room, in the city that never sleeps, Gabe and I sat in silence, 2 strangers whose lives had once passed each other like shadows, now sharing the weight of an old wound without needing to name it aloud. And I knew, from that night forward, something inside Gabe had begun to soften. Not all at once. Not entirely. But it was a small crack in the wall he'd spent years building around himself. Part of that was because of me. But more than anything, It was because of an 8-year-old girl with eyes that could see straight through to the truth in people. Lily had opened a door in Gabe Moretti that no threat, no loyalty, no fear had ever touched. And that, more than anything, might be the most dangerous thing of all. I began to notice something was wrong on a Monday morning as I walked Lily to school. From the moment we stepped off the subway platform and made our way toward the gates, I had the distinct, prickling sensation that someone was watching us. It wasn't obvious, more like a brush of cold air across the back of my neck, but it was enough to make me glance behind twice. The first time, there was nothing, just the rush of commuters, honking horns, and hurried footsteps. But the second time, I caught sight of a man standing beside a streetlight, holding a phone but not looking at it. He was staring directly at me. His eyes didn't flinch when I met them. He wasn't hostile. He wasn't friendly either. His expression was hollow, as if I wasn't even a person, just something to be monitored. I tightened my grip on Lily's hand and quickened our pace. When I looked again, he was gone. I didn't say anything to Lily. She was still cheerfully talking about her upcoming art class and the pink crayon her desk partner had broken. But somewhere beneath my ribs, a quiet unease had started to settle in, winding itself into each breath. That afternoon, when I came home from work, I noticed a thin scratch on the lock of our apartment door, barely visible, but fresh. The lock itself was intact. Nothing was missing. But I knew that handle. I touched it every day. That scratch hadn't been there this morning. I wasn't someone who'd grown up with danger. But a mother's instincts don't ask for experience. They just know. I called Mrs. Jenkins immediately and told her not to open the door for anyone unfamiliar. Not even a delivery driver in uniform. I checked every window, moved the spare key to a new hiding place, and pulled the curtains closed the moment the sun began to fade. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, I stepped onto the narrow balcony outside our apartment. The early autumn wind sliced through my thin sweater, but I stayed. I needed air. Needed to think. I leaned against the railing and tried to shake the feeling that had been growing stronger since the night we left Gabe's apartment. I knew I had stepped into a world far more complicated than it appeared from the outside, but I hadn't expected it to seep into my everyday life, into morning walks and front doors, and the sound of my daughter's laughter. The next day, I knew with certainty that I was being followed. It was no longer a feeling. It was fact. A man stood just beyond the subway entrance, half hidden among the crowd. He wore a long coat, earbuds in, his face impassive, but his eyes never left me. When I pretended to cross the street and turned suddenly, he pivoted. Too quickly, as if the game had rules he wasn't allowed to break in public. I walked faster, my heart hammering, phone clutched in my hand, though I had no idea who to call. The police wouldn't take me seriously over a stranger on the street. And Gabe, I wasn't sure I was ready to pull him into this. Not yet. But that night, when I came home, there was a note shoved under my door. Just a small piece of paper. A single sentence written in clean, Avon handwriting. No name. No signature. Be careful what you reveal. I stared at the note, and my blood ran cold. This wasn't a warning. It was a message. Someone knew me, knew where I lived, and they wanted me to know I was being watched. I folded the paper, lit a match, and burned it over the sink. Then I sat there, motionless in the cramped kitchen, listening to Lily's laughter from the other room and feeling like I had just slipped into a darkness I couldn't find my way out of. I knew then that I had only one choice. I had to talk to Gabe, not because I needed protection, but because this had moved beyond the lines a single mother could hold at bay on her own, and this time, the threat wasn't just aimed at me. It had found its way to my daughter. I walked into the restaurant that afternoon with a tightness in my chest so sharp it nearly stole my breath. All day, I'd been glancing over my shoulder, the sensation of being watched still clinging to me like a second skin. I'd planned to find Gabe, to speak with him directly about what had begun to unfold around me. Even if doing so meant stepping closer to a danger I was trying desperately to keep at arm's length. But I didn't expect everything to escalate so quickly, and so completely. The atmosphere shifted the moment I stepped into the lobby. It was unmistakable. The usual hum of voices was gone, replaced by a brittle silence. Staff moved briskly but spoke in hushed tones. their faces marked by something far beyond routine stress. Gabe wasn't there. The old manager wasn't either. Instead, a stranger stood at the host desk. Stocky, his gaze sharp and fast. His eyes swept over me without surprise, as if he'd been briefed. Warned even. I made my way to the back, to the area usually reserved for senior staff, and saw Lucas, the kitchen hand who once warned me about getting too close, leaning in to whisper something to another server. When he spotted me, he stepped forward quickly. "Emily," he said, voice low. "Gabe's looking for you. Upstairs. Meeting room. Something's gone down." I didn't ask questions. My heart was already pounding as I took the back stairs 2 at a time. The door to the meeting room was slightly ajar, and I froze just outside when I heard Gabe's voice inside, low, cold, and laced with fury. He gave Barone internal files, VIP guest lists, my movements, even details about Emily and her daughter. The words hit me like a blow. Inside, Gabe stood facing 2 men. One I recognized from fleeting moments in the restaurant. The other tall, broad, with streaks of silver in his hair. Gabe's hands were clenched against the polished surface of the table. His face unreadable, but for the quiet storm behind his eyes. "Marcus swore he'd never turn," said the silver-haired man. "He's been with you nearly 20 years. And that's exactly why I didn't see it coming," Gabe replied, his voice darkening. "He's the one who leaked Emily's address. He set the surveillance on Lily." I stepped into the room then, unable to stay silent. "They've already come to my door," I said, my voice low but steady. "They left a message. They know everything." Gabe turned to me, and in his eyes I saw something that hadn't been there before: pain, and something unshakable behind it. "Then we're out of time." He dismissed the 2 men with a sharp nod. As soon as they were gone, he closed the distance between us. "You pack tonight," he said, his tone final. "I'm moving you and Lily to the penthouse. No discussion. No refusal. This isn't a choice." I opened my mouth to argue, to say I couldn't live in a world where every hallway was watched, where every breath felt borrowed. But then I thought of the man standing beside the lamppost, of the thin scratch on my door, of the small, sleeping body of my daughter curled in our bed while shadows pressed closer. I nodded. Gabe pulled out his phone and issued quiet commands that brokered no dissent. 30 minutes later, the familiar black SUV pulled up outside our worn-down building. 2 men in dark clothing, sharp-eyed and silent, helped me load our belongings into the trunk. Lily sat beside me, holding her worn plush rabbit, her eyes wide. "Where are we going?" "Mommy. Somewhere safer." "Sweetheart." I squeezed her hand. "Just for a little while." As the car pulled away, I looked back at the building where I'd spent the last 3 years. The rusted stair rails, the faded curtain in our window, the late-night walks home, and the chaotic morning rushes to school. It all felt like a dream softening at the edges, slowly folding into the past. The penthouse appeared like a world apart behind glass and glowing city lights. The doorman was waiting, nodding once as if he'd been expecting every turn of this evening. Gabe was already inside, standing in the entryway, his gaze fixed on us the moment we stepped through the door. No gentle phrasing, no vague promises. "From now on," he said, steady and sure, "I'll make sure you're safe, whatever it takes." And I knew, from that moment on, we were no longer outsiders to what was happening. I also knew the days ahead wouldn't be simple. They wouldn't be quiet, but I had no choice anymore. Because for the first time, I believed that when Gabe Moretti spoke, he wasn't offering comfort. He was making a vow, one he fully intended to keep with everything he had left. The first days living in Gabe's penthouse passed like a dream, with no clear shape, too quiet, too flawless, and far too unfamiliar. The apartment was vast, so wide that it took nearly a full minute to walk from Lily's bedroom to the kitchen. Polished wooden floors, walls of glass that opened into the endless Manhattan skyline. Every piece of furniture radiating a cold elegance, the kind that belongs in a design magazine, not in a home. And yet, Gabe was there, not looming, not distant, but present in a quiet, steady way that surprised me. He didn't interfere with our routines. He didn't try to control our days. All he asked was that we follow a few security rules: don't go out without escort. Don't open the door for anyone unfamiliar. And always keep our phones within reach. It made me feel like we were living inside a sealed, silent parallel world, utterly protected. And yet just as suffocating. Still, I couldn't deny one thing: Lily adapted quickly. She loved her new room painted in soft pinks. The shelves full of storybooks and comic adventures. The mornings with fresh pancakes and bright fruit instead of dry cereal. And Gabe never kept his distance from her. He listened as she told stories about school, sat beside her to admire her drawings, and even helped her fold paper models for a class project. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find him cross-legged on the carpet with Lily, both of them laughing over a paper dragon whose head had been glued on sideways. That image, so ordinary, so strangely tender, stopped me in my tracks. There was something incredibly real in the way Gabe looked at my daughter, in the way he let her into his world without hesitation or calculation. And it was that truth, more than anything, that made me begin to look at him differently. Not as the powerful man whose name carried weight like a loaded weapon, not as the untouchable figure cloaked in silence and threat, but as a man who had once lost too much, as someone who, perhaps, was trying to find what he had lost in the quietest places, in small paper dragons, in crayons, in the laughter of a child. As for me, the instinct to keep my guard up slowly began to fade. I no longer flinched at every creak of the door. I stopped waking in the middle of the night, heart racing, ears straining for sounds that didn't belong. Instead, I woke early and made coffee, watching the pale light stretch across the buildings outside. Some mornings, Gabe was already there in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, quietly pouring coffee into 2 mugs without a word. We stood side by side in silence. But it was the kind of silence that holds weight, not emptiness, but presence. I could feel something slowly growing between us. Not rushing, not spoken aloud, but steady and certain, like 2 heartbeats beginning to fall into rhythm. One evening, after Lily had gone to sleep, I stepped out onto the balcony to catch a breath of air. Gabe was already there, holding a glass of wine, eyes tracing the blinking lights across the river. I joined him, standing just an arm's length away. "Thank you for letting us stay," I said softly. "This wasn't part of my plan." He turned his head slightly, his eyes catching the faint city light. "Nothing in my life has ever followed a plan." I smiled at that, a quiet breath of something close to laughter, escaping before a chill brushed past the back of my neck. Gabe noticed, without a word. He slipped his coat from his shoulders and draped it over mine. My shoulder brushed against his chest, and in that small, still moment, my heart stuttered, not in fear, but in the way a heart does when it senses it's standing too close to something it no longer wants to walk away from. He didn't say anything else, just stood there beside me, watching the city drift further into night. But I knew, in that quiet moment, that something had shifted. The line between gratitude and something more had begun to blur. And perhaps the most frightening thing wasn't the men in the shadows, the threats at our doorstep, or the world we'd stepped into. It was the growing part of me that no longer wanted to leave this place, no longer wanted to leave him, no longer knew how to return to the old world if this one ever let us go. If it ever could. That morning began like so many others in the gleaming sanctuary perched high above the city. Yet its ending was something no one could have foreseen. Gabe had left early, without saying where he was going, only leaving a brief message that he had something important to take care of. That was not unusual. His world was not the world I once knew, and silence was often the only way to protect what mattered. I spent the morning tidying Lily's room, brewing coffee, and reading an old book in the library Gabe once told me was the rare place where he felt at peace. But by midday, when the antique clock chimed 12:30, I felt something shift. He always checked in when he was gone too long, always let me know he was safe. Today, the silence pressed against the walls. I tried calling. No signal. I tried Lucas, the only person I trusted enough to ask. No answer. 1 hour passed. Then 2. I paced the living room, anxiety coiling tighter with every minute. Then, At 3 o'clock. My phone rang. A strange number. I answered. My heart beat thudding painfully in my chest. The voice was unfamiliar, deep and dry like ashes. Good afternoon. Miss Sanders. I trust you know who you're speaking to. I said nothing. My throat closed. His voice continued. Our mutual friend, Mr. Moretti, is unable to take calls at the moment. He is temporarily unwell. My fingers tightened around the phone. What do you want? A fair exchange. Gabe's silence in certain business matters has made some people displeased, and I believe your presence may encourage his cooperation. I heard metal scrape on the other end, followed by a muffled groan. My blood ran cold. If you want him returned intact, you will follow instructions. I will not let myself be dragged into this, I whispered, trying to steady my voice, though I already knew I was far beyond the point of turning back. Oh, but you were dragged in the night you lifted him off that sidewalk in Queens, he said, and a low, chilling laugh followed, scraping down my spine. You have 1 hour to arrange someone to watch the child. Then someone will collect you. Alone. No guards. No Gabe. No games. If you refuse, he paused. Then I heard the snap of a camera and a photo appeared on my screen. I opened it. Gabe, tied to a chair, face bruised, blood streaking down his temple. From the other room came Lily's bright little voice, humming to herself, a sound like sunlight filtering through leaves. My hands trembled as I set the phone down. I had learned long ago how to steady myself in fear when I was expelled from school for being pregnant, when I gave birth alone in a sterile hospital room, when I juggled 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. But now I knew I was facing the kind of terror that breaks even the strongest resolve, a choice between the life of the man I had begun to love and the safety of my child. I walked to Lily's room, forcing a smile to my face. Sweetheart, Mommy needs to go out for a little while. Miss Bova will stay and play with you. All right. She looked up, wide-eyed. Where are you going? To see a friend. I'll be back soon. I held her close, breathing in the soft cotton candy scent of her hair, and my heart clenched. I did not know if I would return, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I could not let Gabe die. Not when I had once chosen to save him, and would choose the same again without hesitation. I just never imagined that this time, the price would be so unbearably high. I left the penthouse like a shadow, my heart pounding so hard, I swore it echoed through the quiet hallway. Mrs. Bova stood by the doorway, her thin hand gripping mine for a single, trembling second before I left. She did not ask questions. She simply looked at me with the deep, weary knowing of someone who had lived too long with fear and secrets. Come back to the child, she whispered. No matter what happens. I nodded, though I could not be certain I would keep that promise. The unmarked car waited at the curb, exactly as they had said. The driver sat with a cap pulled low, face hidden in the shade. I opened the door and got in without a word. He did not speak either. As the car pulled away, I watched the building shrink in the rearview mirror, the warm yellow lights of the home where Lily slept, dissolving into a world I was walking away from, unsure if I would ever step back into it again. We drove deep into the industrial district near the docks, where old warehouses crouched beside rusted tracks and the air smelled of salt and steel. Night had settled fully, wind carrying the scent of oil and metal across the cold concrete. The car stopped before a large warehouse with a steel door and a single dim bulb flickering above it like a tired guardian. The driver opened my door, and once I stepped out, he drove off at once, leaving me standing alone in the open emptiness that seemed to swallow sound. A soft metallic scrape sounded as the warehouse door slid open. I did not shake, did not cry. Fear had burned so hot inside me these past days that there was almost nothing left to feel. Inside, yellow light pooled across dusty cement floors and stacks of old crates, and at the center, tied to a metal chair, was Gabe, his hands bound behind him, his shirt torn at the shoulder. Dried blood streaked across his cheek, a swelling bruise shadowing his eye. Yet when he saw me, those ice-blue eyes widened in something close to panic. Emily, you should not be here. His voice was raw, scraped thin by pain. I did not answer. I stepped forward, only stopping when footsteps echoed in the space. A man emerged from behind a steel pillar. Baron. He needed no introduction. There was a precision to him, a blade-like grace in the way he moved. Dressed in dark clothes, eyes sharp and empty as polished stone. "Miss Sanders," he said, his voice smooth as cold glass. "Your loyalty is admirable." I lifted my head. I did not come out of loyalty. I came to end this. One brow lifted, a flicker of dark amusement passing across his face. "You think you can negotiate with me?" I did not retreat. I stood firm. "I do not think. I know. I am not threat, nor power. But I have something you do not. And what is that? I am not afraid of you." Silence gathered thick as dust. Then he laughed. A dry, brittle sound. "You should fear me. This is not a fairy tale where the good woman saves the monster." I held his gaze. "You are wrong about one thing. Gabe is not the monster. Men like you made him one. For a heartbeat." His face changed. A crack in the mask. I stepped closer. "You want power. Control. To watch him lose what you cannot buy." He paused. "And what is that? Someone who truly cares for him." His steps halted. Something flickered in his eyes. Something tired and human and gone in a breath. I drew in a steady breath. "I will go with you. I will leave his life. But you let him go. And you never touch my daughter." Gabe shouted then, voice tearing with desperation. "No, Emily. No. You do not understand him. I will not let you do this." I turned toward him, and my heart ached as if something inside me were splitting open. "I understand the only thing that matters. Lily needs me. And you need to live." Baron watched me like I was a creature he had never seen before. Then he laughed again. Softer this time. Almost curious. A woman willing to sacrifice herself for her child, and for the man she loves. Interesting. The word love struck like a bell inside my chest. But I did not flinch. He stopped only a breath away from me. "Very well," he said quietly. "I accept your terms." I inhaled slowly, bracing myself for the darkness ahead. But I did not know then that within seconds everything would change. Because in this war, not everyone had come willing to let the night end in blood. The steel door behind us burst open with a metallic crash that cut through the silence like a blade. Every head in the warehouse turned toward the sound. Footsteps echoed, not rushed, not heavy, but measured and unwavering. Not the clatter of a man's stride, but something sharper. More precise. A woman emerged from the shadows. Tall, composed. Her dark brown hair tied neatly back. A long coat draped over her shoulders like a cloak. And though she said nothing, her presence sent a chill through the room. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to be announced. The air shifted around her. Baroni turned slowly. And for the first time, I saw something flicker across his face, disbelief. I froze. She held his gaze with an expression that carried no rage, no fear, only the kind of bone-deep disappointment that cuts far deeper than anger. "Elena," Baron said, his voice rasping, "you shouldn't be here." The woman, his wife, took another step forward. The dim warehouse light catching the line's time had etched into what had once been fierce beauty. She wore them like armor. There was still elegance in her, but it was the kind that had survived fire. "I came," she said, her voice low and steady, "because I couldn't watch you become the man you once despised." Baroni clenched his fists. "This isn't your concern. It's business." She walked closer until only a few feet separated them. "Your business," she said, "has kept our family in hiding for 3 months. Your son calls me every night asking when he can go back to school, when we can eat dinner like a family again." Her voice broke slightly as her eyes shifted to me. "And now you've kidnapped a woman and threatened a child, all to win a war you don't even remember starting." Baroni's breath caught in his throat. He stepped back as if her words had weight, as if they pressed on his chest. "I'm doing this for our family," he said. "No. Victor," Elena whispered, her voice trembling, not from fear but from restraint. "You're destroying our family to protect the hollow shell of your power. The man I married would never have done this. That man once told me he wanted out, that he wanted to build something better. But now you're pointing a gun at a mother, At a man trying to protect the woman he loves, just because they dared to walk a path you were never brave enough to take. I stood still, barely breathing. Gabe watched her with a look that bordered on disbelief, as if trying to grasp something long forgotten. Barone didn't move. His face was drawn tight, his jaw locked, his arms limp at his sides. A battle was unfolding inside him, and everyone in the room could feel it. Elena turned to me then, her eyes softened. "You're Emily, aren't you?" she asked gently. "I'm sorry for what Victor has done, for the fear your family has had to live through." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump rising in my throat. Then she turned back to her husband. "Victor," she said, her voice now a plea. "End this. If not for yourself, then for your son, for the fragments of love we still have." Barone raised his head and looked at her, and for one fragile moment, he was no longer the shadow behind city walls, no longer the ghost of violence and control. He was a man, a husband, a father standing at the crossroads between ruin and redemption. He exhaled, a long breath that sounded like it had been buried in his lungs for years. "Unti Moretti," he said. "Make sure they get home safely." The order fell like a stone into still water. No one questioned it. The two men guarding Gabe hesitated, then scrambled to obey. Gabe collapsed forward as the ropes fell away, but he caught himself on his knees, then pushed up again, wounded but conscious. His eyes found mine across the room, dazed and bloodied but alive. When I ran to him, he reached for me like a drowning man, and his hand gripped my shoulder, as if letting go would mean vanishing again. Elena approached her husband one last time and laid her hand gently on his shoulder. "You can still become the man your son will be proud of," she said quietly, "but only if you choose to end things before it's too late." Then she turned and walked away. She left behind a warehouse wrapped in silence, and a man who had come within an inch of losing everything, not to bullets, not to rivals, but to his own blind pride. On the drive away from the warehouse, Gabe and I sat in silence in the back of Elena's dark SUV. She didn't speak much either, just glanced at Gabe through the rearview mirror, then at me, as if weighing something she hadn't quite decided to say aloud. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten, the air settling into a kind of stillness that only comes after a storm. Elena eventually pulled up in front of a large building on the edge of Brooklyn. Its exterieur sleek but discreet. I assumed it was one of the Barone family's many transactional fronts, a neutral ground dressed in civilian clothes. She turned to face me, her expression serious but not unkind. "You need to understand this, Emily," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "If we don't find a new way forward, the violence will return. It's only a matter of time. Victor has ordered a retreat." "Yes, but in this world, suspicion is enough to kill any hope before it begins." I nodded, still holding tightly to Gabe's hand. He hadn't spoken since being freed. His face was tense, unreadable, like he was working through a storm that hadn't yet passed. I turned to Elena. "What do you need me to do?" She exhaled softly. "They need someone between them. Someone not bound by history or power or blood debts. I'll speak for Victor, but I need you by my side, because Gabe will listen to you, and because you have something the rest of us lost a long time ago." She paused, her eyes steady. "Trust." The meeting was arranged for that afternoon, inside one of Gabe's upscale restaurants, the kind reserved for quiet negotiations, where senators dined behind closed doors and the air always smelled faintly of money and caution. We gathered in the private room upstairs. The atmosphere was heavy, watchful. Elena sat on one side of the long table, representing Victor. I sat at the center, not as a mediator by title, but by necessity. My notebook open, recording every word as carefully as I could. Gabe arrived last. The bruising on his face hadn't fully faded, but his eyes were no longer sharp with cold calculation. When he saw me, something flickered behind them, not gratitude, not relief, but something deeper, something that had taken root since the night I found him bleeding in the rain. He nodded to Elena, then turned to me. "If you're here," he said quietly, "then I'll listen." I took a deep breath and began. "We weren't lawyers. There were no contracts, Not corporate paper trails. But the words spoken in that room weighed more than ink. They would shape the lives of hundreds, maybe thousands. Elena proposed a full withdrawal from the Queens sector, an area Gabe had been developing for legitimate business growth. In exchange, Gabe would guarantee no expansion into southern Manhattan distribution, Routes Baronne territory for 2 decades. I repeated each point with careful clarity. Softening where needed. Grounding when tensions rose. Not as rival factions, but as 2 fractured families trying, desperately, to protect what remained of the people they loved. That agreement territorial, simple on the surface, passed with little resistance. The next issue was more complex. Who would oversee the shared checkpoints? The spaces once used to wage silent wars. Elena offered a neutral task force members from both families, overseen by a third party. I offered something different. Let it be staffed by those who suffered under both sides. I said, the forgotten ones, the ones who deserve a chance to build something better. There was silence. Then Gabe looked at me, really looked. Something in his face eased. Just a little. If we don't give others a second chance, he said, his voice low, then we don't deserve one either. Elena smiled. The kind of smile that comes not from triumph but from understanding. For 3 hours we worked through each clause, each compromise. When the light outside finally began to fade, what we were left with was a fragile but living peace not signed, not stamped, but sealed in the quiet, firm handshake of 2 people who had once seen each other as enemies. Elena took my hand as she left, her grip strong, her voice steady. You saved a life today, she said. Not just Gabe's, not just Victor's, maybe even your own. Gabe waited for me in the hallway. He said nothing at first. He didn't need to. He just reached for my hand and held it tight. And in that moment, I knew we had just stepped through a door that couldn't be closed. Not just an ending to a war, but the beginning of something entirely new. Something that, for the first time in a very long time, felt like it could be called hope. The SUV rolled away from the restaurant in silence, its tinted windows catching the last streaks of golden light like the final brushstrokes closing a chapter no one had seen coming. Gabe sat beside me, his hand resting gently on my leg, as if he needed to touch something real, something still breathing after all that had happened. For a few long minutes, we said nothing. We were both exhausted, not just from the hours of tense negotiation, but from the quiet, emotional wreckage that still echoed in our chests with every breath. I turned to him. The bruises still colored his cheekbone and temple, stark against his pale skin. But his eyes had lost their cold edge. They were the eyes of a man who had seen too much, lost too much, and just barely held on to something that might have been taken away forever. Are you okay? Gabe was the first to speak, his voice low and rough from weariness. I nodded. And you? He gave a small, brief smile, more like an exhale than an expression. Still breathing. Thanks to you. If you hadn't come, I'd probably be just another name on the morning news. I looked away, watching the city blur by through the glass. Lights blinked on across the skyline, familiar and distant, like memories from a life I wasn't sure still belonged to me. You shouldn't have gone in alone, I whispered, my voice unsteady. When I found out they had you, everything just stopped. I didn't know what to do except go myself. If I hadn't, I might have lost you for good. Gabe said nothing. Then he reached for my hand and gave it a soft, steady squeeze. When I saw you in that warehouse, he said, that was the first time I've ever felt afraid. Not of dying, of you being hurt, of everything I've dragged behind me reaching your life. And Lily's. I met his eyes. It already has. Gabe. They know my name. They know my daughter's name. We can't pretend anymore that we live in 2 different worlds. He nodded, gaze distant. I know. That's why I'm going to end it. All of it. Every dirty thread I've woven into this empire. I'll tear it out, piece by piece. For you, for Lily, for us. I turned to him and, for the first time in days, let myself reach up and touch the fading bruise on his cheek. His eyes softened under my fingers, like something inside him was melting into something human again. I used to believe men like you couldn't change. I murmured, but the morning I saw you in my kitchen, making pancakes in that plain black t-shirt, I knew there was something else inside you, something still waiting to be saved. He let out a breath of laughter, quiet and dry, and you saved it. I don't know who saved who, I said softly. Maybe you saved me too. When I met you, I was surviving, but I wasn't really living. I poured everything into work, into raising my daughter, but I forgot what it felt like to be seen, to be cared for. Gabe turned to me, his eyes catching the shimmer of passing streetlights. You know, the first time I heard about you wasn't at the restaurant. I frowned slightly. What do you mean? He looked forward again, as if retracing something in his memory. One of the older staff told me about a little girl who used to draw pictures for the kitchen, and her mom, the one who always came in early, who cleaned tables before the lights were even on. Before I ever met you, I wanted to know who that woman was. I didn't say anything. My throat tightened with a sudden, aching fullness. Those quiet words carried more weight than anything poetic ever could. As the car turned onto the street that led to the penthouse, I looked at him and asked, Gabe, if we could start over. No shadows, no threats, just 3 people in a small family. Do you think you'd be happy? He didn't hesitate. If it's with you and Lily, then I don't care if we start in a 1-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. That would be the best life I could ever ask for. I smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't a smile I had to hide behind. It didn't carry fear, just hope, and a quiet, steady love that had begun to grow in the softest corners of our lives, patient and unspoken, but very much alive in every shared breath between us. After that night, Gabe was no longer the man who walked in shadows. He changed not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. It was a choice that came from the deepest part of himself, born from the clear, trusting gaze of a child named Lily, from the trembling voice of a woman standing in the rain, and from the raw, unfamiliar terror of almost losing the one person he had come to love. In the days following the rescue, the penthouse grew quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar. There were no more urgent calls, no echo of rapid footfalls from his security team. Gabe began spending more time on the balcony, looking out over a city he had once held in the palm of his hand. But now, it looked like something he was ready to let go of, in exchange for something far more precious. One early autumn morning, as sunlight filtered through clouds soft as silk, Gabe placed a thick folder in front of me. It was a detailed plan, he said, to dismantle the underground branches of his empire. All contracts would be terminated. Untraceable assets would be sold off to fund a charitable foundation. I stared at him, unsure I had heard correctly. Are you certain? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. This is the world you built with your youth. Your blood. He nodded, calm and unwavering. He had once believed power was the only way to protect the people he loved, but I had shown him something else. Sometimes, the truest protection is learning to let go, to free yourself from fear, to stop being the danger you thought you were shielding others from. He didn't want Lily to grow up in a world where decisions were made through threats and blood-soaked deals. I reached for his hand, said nothing, and let my silence carry the full weight of my trust. Gabe began showing up in public spaces, not in dark suits with bodyguards in tow, but with me and Lily beside him. We visited her new school together, stopped by local art centers for children that he had begun sponsoring. The press was skeptical, digging for stories, but they grew quiet when they saw the way Lily ran into his arms, laughing without fear, or how gently he wiped marker smudges off her small fingers like any loving father would. He didn't defend himself. He let his actions speak. One night, I found him sitting alone in his study. A soft yellow lamp cast a quiet light over a framed photo beside a cooling cup of tea. It was a picture of Gabe and a little girl, both laughing, their faces bright and carefree in a world that no longer existed. Her name was Anna, he said softly, his voice catching. She loved to draw, like Lily, the day she died. He had sworn never to let anyone he loved be hurt again, but he had tried to keep that promise in all the wrong ways. Not anymore, I said, wrapping my fingers around his. "She would be proud of you now." He nodded, then leaned in and kissed my forehead. And in that simple gesture was something warm, something solid, something deeply at peace. Gabe had not just walked away from an empire. He was becoming someone new. A man once known by fear, now spoken of with quiet respect. A figure once cloaked in secrecy, now stepping into the light not with pride, but with humility. And I, the woman who once believed she would always just be a single mother with a small life, stood witness to that transformation, day by day, moment by moment, in the very home I had first entered on a storm-soaked night that changed everything. After the sweeping changes in Gabe's life, everything gradually settled into a new rhythm, quieter, steadier, and filled with the kind of peace that once seemed impossible. The echoes of gunshots in the night had faded, the clandestine meetings, the whispered names, the dread-laced respect once bound to his name, all of it gone. In their place were the bright, unguarded laughs of children. The tearful eyes of single mothers offered a lifeline, and walls covered with blueprints for projects no one could have imagined Gabe Rossi would one day lead. The Anna Foundation was born just weeks after Gabe formally stepped away from every illicit operation he had ever built. He named it not for himself, not for legacy, but for his sister. Not a marble monument cold with sorrow, but a living network of schools, libraries, art studios, scholarships, and healthcare centers built from the fragments of everything she once dreamed of when she was alive. The launch didn't happen at a 5-star hotel or under the glitter of chandeliers. It took place at a modest schoolyard in Brooklyn. A light rain fell. Gabe stood beside me and Lily under a narrow awning, his jacket draped over my shoulders like a soft shield against the weather. Under white umbrellas, children laughed and tugged at each other's sleeves. Holding the first set of colored pencils gifted by the foundation, one little girl tugged on my coat, her eyes wide and shining. "Miss, is that the man who's giving us the art class? I'm gonna draw really good, so he'll be proud." I nodded and glanced at Gabe. He was quietly wiping his glasses, looking away, but I knew his heart was trembling under the calm surface. Lily ran across the damp pavement, cradling her new sketchbook, chattering to anyone who'd listen that Daddy Gabe built our new school. That Daddy Gabe said I won't ever have to change schools again just 'cause of money. She'd never formally called him Daddy to us, but in her heart, that bond had long been formed. I once asked Gabe why he didn't name the foundation after himself. He gave a small, thoughtful smile and said his name belonged to the past. Anna's name times that times was for the future. But the foundation was more than schools and scholarships. It was a web of legal aid, trauma counseling, and job placement services for women who had lived through the same fears I once had. I remember walking with Gabe through one of the new women's centers, brightly painted walls, children's artwork taped to every surface, windows wide open to let in sunlight. A woman in her 40s clung to Gabe, sobbing, telling him that because of the foundation, she finally had the courage to leave the man who had terrorized her for 20 years. Gabe didn't speak. He rarely did in those moments, but his silence held more empathy than most people's words. As for me, I was no longer the woman wiping tables in a quiet corner of his restaurant. I was now the coordinator of the foundation's scholarship program, drawing up educational plans, standing in classrooms, and speaking to wide-eyed children about how one decision, one bold moment, can change the direction of an entire life. One quiet afternoon, as the three of us stood in the small garden of the Children's Art Center, Lily looked up at me, her voice curious and sincere. "Mom, if you hadn't helped Gabe that night, would I still go to my new school?" I pulled her into my arms and looked over at Gabe. He said nothing, just reached out to gently brush her hair away from her face. I smiled and told her, maybe I wasn't thinking about all this when it happened, but I know one thing. If I had to choose again, I'd still help him. Because sometimes, one choice doesn't just save a person, it changes the future of a whole family. And from the ashes of a past that once seemed destined to haunt him forever, Gabe Rossi had built something far more lasting than power. He had built something beautiful. Mornings in the penthouse no longer echoed with urgent phone calls or the hurried footsteps of bodyguards patrolling the halls. Instead, There was Lily's cheerful voice recounting her dreams while crunching cereal, the scent of apple pastries drifting from the kitchen, and the soft laughter of Gabe when I playfully dusted flour onto his nose as we made breakfast together. We hadn't made any official announcement about our relationship, no declarations. No labels, but everything around us spoke louder than words. Gabe, the man who once walked through shadows, now spent his afternoons coloring beside Lily, or patiently explaining math problems while I prepared dinner. Once, I stood quietly at the kitchen door and watched him kneel to tie Lily's shoelaces, then kiss her forehead with a tenderness that melted something inside me. He wasn't trying to be Lily's father. He was simply being himself, gentle, steady, present, and somehow, that made her open her heart in ways I never dared to expect. One evening, while I was reading in bed, Lily softly knocked on the door and climbed beside me. "Mom," she whispered, "can I call Gabe Dad? I know he's not my real dad, but he's kind, like a real one." I froze for a moment, then nodded and held her close. My heart was full. Not long after, on an early winter weekend, Gabe took us to a small lakeside cabin outside the city, his private hideaway from a former life of chaos. He'd renovated it completely, turning it into a quiet retreat for weekends and, as he called it, the first memories of a new kind of family. That afternoon, the three of us sat wrapped in blankets by the fire. Lily had dozed off on the couch, her head resting on Gabe's shoulder. He gently stroked her hair, his eyes meeting mine. "I never thought I'd have this," he said softly. "A place not built on fear or strategy, just peace. This strange kind of peace." I reached for his hand. "Neither did I," I said. "Maybe that's why it feels so precious." On winter nights, when the snow began to fall, Gabe would take Lily out onto the balcony to watch the flakes drift through the city lights. He taught her how to count stars on the rare, clear nights. And we'd play games drawing shapes in the fogged-up glass together. Little things so ordinary, so mundane, yet they were things I once believed were too much to hope for as a single mother trying to survive. Our relationship wasn't always sweet or effortless. We argued sometimes over who left the milk carton open, who forgot to set the alarm, who made Lily late for school. But in every disagreement was a lesson in how to live together, how to bend without breaking, and how to love without condition. Gabe still carried scars from his past. Some nights, he'd wake up from nightmares, breathless, tense. But now, instead of suffering alone, he would turn to me, pull me close, bury his face in my hair like it was the only thing tethering him to the present. And I, once the woman who braved everything alone, had learned how to lean on someone, not out of necessity, but because I truly knew that I was loved. That spring, Lily drew a picture. 3 people, standing hand in hand in front of a little house. She called it my family, and I cried not from sorrow, but from something deeper. For the first time in my life, family wasn't a concept I admired from afar. It was something I lived, every single day. And in my heart, there was no more room for doubt. We were a family, a real one, and every scar we bore was no longer a wound, but a reminder of how far we had come and how deeply we had chosen one another. That night, Gabe told me to dress up a little. He didn't say where we were going, just smiled and handed me a small box containing a pair of pearl earrings. Simple yet elegant. Lily had already been picked up by Mrs. Jenkins for a movie night. My daughter giggled mischievously as she stepped out the door, giving me a knowing wink. I felt something was coming, something I had sensed quietly through the peaceful afternoons in our kitchen, or the way Gabe's eyes softened when he watched me and Lily basking in the golden spring light of New York. He led me to the very top floor of the building. Once a bare rooftop of cold concrete, tonight it had been transformed into a silent, glowing garden. Warm yellow lights wrapped around pillars of climbing roses. Hundreds of candles lined the wooden pathway, flickering softly under the early summer breeze. The air smelled faintly of jasmine and lavender. Gabe stood in the center of it all, dressed in a white shirt and a light gray vest, simple, but quietly ceremonial. My heart beat slowly and heavily, as if echoing the rhythm of something inevitable. No introductions, no grand gestures. He simply held out his hand and pulled me gently forward. He looked at me for a long time, so long that I felt like he was memorizing every line of my face, every trace of joy and sorrow I had carried with me, until it all faded into a kind of quiet grace. "You came into my life when I thought I had nothing left to hold on to," he said. "I used to think I didn't deserve another chance. But then you showed up. You didn't ask for anything. You were just you, and that saved me." His voice was low, each word striking straight into my chest. I felt myself tremble, not from the wind, but because I knew what was happening was real, irrevocable. Gabe knelt before me and opened a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate ring, a single teardrop-shaped diamond, clear and quietly beautiful. When he looked up, there was no trace of the man who once controlled an empire in the shadows, only a man giving everything he was to ask one simple question. "Emily Sanders," he said, "will you marry me?" For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened with tears. Part of me had waited for this moment for so long. Another part still couldn't believe someone like me could be loved this deeply. I nodded. Then I nodded again, just to be sure he heard it. "Yes," I whispered. "I will." Gabe rose and pulled me into his arms, holding me like he never wanted to let go again. Behind us, the candles kept burning. Their soft glow danced against the night sky of New York, the very city that had thrown us into each other's orbit all those months ago. He kissed my forehead, light as a vow. No lavish party, no crowd to witness, just two people who had weathered storms, now finally standing still in one another, under that star-strewn sky, surrounded by flowers and silence. We made a new promise. Not to begin again, but to continue. To keep living, to keep loving, to keep being the safest place for each other. And for the first time in my life, I saw my future clearly. No fear, no loneliness, just the three of us. A family, and a love deep enough to heal even the wounds without a name. Sometimes, life doesn't take us where we want to go, but it takes us exactly where we need to be. And for me, the journey from a struggling single mother trying to survive in the streets of New York to becoming the fiancé of a man once feared as a notorious crime boss is the clearest proof of that truth. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a dream. It was a choice. A series of choices made in moments no one could have predicted. From the moment I decided not to leave a drunken stranger lying unconscious on a cold, rainy street, fate began to shift. Not just his life changed that night, but mine too. And my little girl's. Gabe is no longer a name people whisper in fear. He is now the founder of the Anna Foundation. He is the gentle father who tucks Lily in at night. He is the man who makes my coffee every morning and kisses my forehead before heading out the door. Our family of three may not look like any conventional picture, but it is love and forgiveness and every hard-earned lesson from the past that built this home. A real home. If there's one thing I've learned through all of it, it's this. No one is meant to walk through life alone. Not forever. Even if you've been hurt. Even if you've lost more than you can count. Even if you've made mistakes that still echo through your quietest moments, somewhere out there. Someone will see the good in you. Someone will love you not because you're perfect, but because you're still trying, still here, still hopeful. Life isn't easy, especially not for single moms like me, but you are not alone. Sometimes, the simple kindness you offer without expecting anything in return becomes the door to a new life. And sometimes, the smallest choice, like helping someone you were never meant to meet, becomes the beginning of everything. The story of Emily, Gabe, and Lily isn't just ours. It's a reminder that anyone at all, is worthy of love, of healing, and of beginning again, no matter how long they've lived in the dark. If this story touched something in your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Dear Single Mom is a space for real, emotional, deeply human stories, especially for those still searching for connection, for meaning, or simply for a reason to believe in something good again. What did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your own life? Have you ever made a small choice that changed everything? Please share your thoughts in the comments. We would love to hear the most honest words straight from your heart. Thank you so much for spending time with this story. May you always have good health, a peaceful spirit, and a life filled with joy and moments that truly matter. Take care, and we'll see you again in the next video from Dear Single Mom.